So I've noticed on my drive to work in the mornings that the engine is taking a long time to heat up on my XJ. And what I suspect is the culprit is the thermostat, which sits inside there. So today I'm going to take out the housing, replace the thermostat. In order to do that, I've got to drain the coolant. So while I'm busy draining the coolant, I'm going to go deeper down and replace the water pump that sits there as well, because I have noticed a few drips of coolant on the floor every now and again. Not too bad. I keep the coolant tank topped up and it's been okay. But while I've got the coolant out, it will make sense to change out the water pump. So off we go. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to drain the coolant out the system. And the easiest way to do this is to undo this clamp and take off the bottom radiator hose over here, and the coolant will run out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done so long. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take out these two radiator shrouds over here. To do that, we'll have to undo the hose clamp, take off the pipe, undo the electrical connection. Somebody has replaced the bolt that's in there with a screw, so we'll take that out. We've got two screws here and one screw there, and then we'll pull these out.
Some of the bolts and screws were rather badly corroded, and it was a real struggle trying to get them out.
So things never go as expected, and you can see I'm struggling with the screw. I wouldn't recommend you do this, but the only choice I had was to use the pry bar to pry it off.
To get the bolt out, I took the angle grinder and cut the head of the bolt off. I then pried the clip open and removed the bolt and the clip together.
So I scratched around a little bit and found these 1/4 inch by 20 clips, which I'm going to use to replace those over there if they fit. I also found some 1/4 inch by 20 stainless steel screws. I'm going to use stainless here because we know that they rust, and that's why they wouldn't come loose. This way, if we have to take them out again, it'll be much easier to take them out. Right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the thermostat which sits in here. So we're going to undo this heater hose, undo this heater hose. We've already undone this connector over here, and then we'll remove this whole unit. I'm probably going to replace the thermostat housing. So once this thermostat housing is out, we'll pull out the thermostat. So you can see here is where the thermostat sat. And the thermostat has a direction. It goes in this way around, so that the body sits at the back, and as that heats up, it'll open and allow cooling water into the block. So what I suspect is happening is that this is opening up too quickly. So we'll replace that. You can see this is the original Motorrad part, and I always replace with original parts, my choice. The old gasket. Whoever installed this gasket used way too much silicone. This can be very bad because it can block up inside your engine, so we won't use that. And there's the old housing. As you can see, it's very badly corroded. You might have noticed that the fasteners too are all very badly corroded. You have to be very careful when taking them out, because I could feel we were very close to actually snapping this bolt. As a precaution, I'm going to see if I can't find a replacement and just replace this bolt. This one came out fairly easily. I might just do a cleanup. I want to see if I can't find a plated bolt to replace those with. Alright, the next part we're going to take off is the water pump. Here it is over here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to unloosen the 4 bolts of the pulley. If you can see them down there. 4 bolts on this pulley while the belt is still taut. And then we're going to give slack by undoing that screw and adjusting the tensioner. So we'll first loosen the tensioner's bolt, and then we will back it off using this. And you can still see that when I replaced this power steering pump, I was clever enough to put some never sees onto the threads, so this should come back fairly easily. So first these 4 bolts, then this one, and then we'll back it off using that one. Once that's done, we're going to take off all of these bolts here, as well as this hose, and we're going to remove the water pump. So having the bolt on was not enough for me to undo these nuts. So what I had to do was to use a screwdriver, which I wedged in between the bolt and the center, like that, or between 2 bolts, like that. And that gave me enough to just free up all those bolts. So with these 4 bolts loose, I can now go ahead, undo this nut, this bolt here on the tensioner, and then use this to remove tension off the belt, and we can pull the belt off. Alright, so the belt's off and the pulley's off. Okay, so we broke that bolt off, which is going to be interesting to get it back out again. You'll see I used the old water pump to store the bolts so that we know we get the right lengths. In this case, it's pretty easy. Before I do anything, we first got to figure out how to get rid of that stud. And while I'm busy, then I'll clean these surfaces out. And once we've got the stud out and the threads checked and clean surfaces here, we'll push the Jeep back out and pressure wash the engine bay.
Heating the bolt with a torch helps it to break loose from the block.
Well, that came out a lot easier than I was expecting. Usually you end up having to drill it out. So there's the offending bolt. You can see the threads are not damaged. So I don't think there's any damage there, but I'll probably just chase it with the thread tap just to make sure. So I was very fortunate with that one. So one small repair job that needs to be done. You can see this connector over here, the clip has been broken out. So when you push it onto the temperature sensor, there's no clip to hold it. And the previous owner used a piece of wire to retain it. You can see I have a new sensor, a new connector that's got the clip in it. So when you install it onto the sensor, clips into place and cannot come loose, and you need to depress that to pull it back off. So the sensor, the connector which I bought came with wires, and I don't want to disrupt these wires. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disassemble this connector and just reinstall the new connector here. If that doesn't work, then what I'll have to do is pull these wires out, cut them, and connect the new wires. Let's hope that this repair works first. Alright, so I'm going to use a little bit of dielectric grease to make sure that we coat that seal. Then I'm going to use the new connector. First thing, to make sure that the polarity is right. So this wire needs to go in there. The second thing, you've got to make sure to orientate it correctly so that the clip re-engages when you put it in. So I know this one has to go in this way. Pop this in, and you'll see if I give it a gentle tug, it won't come loose. Now we'll follow the same procedure. We'll unclip this one. Okay. There we go. Now the clip has just disengaged. Coat the seal with some dielectric grease again, and we will install it. Once again, make sure the position is correct to the connector, and I could feel the locking tab clip, so we've engaged. So the next thing we need to do is to put the little yellow seal back in. It's not really a seal, it's actually called a locking tab. So the little yellow locking tab, it's got little teeth at the back there that you can see. and they will go down and lock into place and prevent the little locking clips from being undone. So we're going to position that in there, and there you could hear it click into place. So that's into place. And finally, last thing we're going to do is we're going to install this little seal. Seal went in that way around, and we'll just use our tool to slide the seal to the bottom. That seal will keep the water out, because electrical connectors really corrode badly when there's water. So we'll press the seal into place, and there we go. Connected that. Let's just remove this old locking wire, and now when we replace this, there'll be no need to use the locking wire, and the connector will have its tab back on again. Put that into place. There we go. So after we pressure washed it and cleaned the surfaces, we're going to dry it off now, and then we're going to start the reassembly, basically the reverse of what we just did to take it apart. So our new water pump doesn't have the heater tube attached. I'm going to take us to the workbench, install it, and make sure to align this tip to the same position as that tip. So it should end up something like that. Okay, now to reinstall the water pump. Here is the gasket that came with the water pump. That's going to go on that way. Next little bit is going to be absolutely controversial. There are a multitude of ways of installing this. The first way is to put it on dry, just like that, and stick the water pump on and bolt it up. And that is one way of doing it, and you can and should do it that way if that's the way you prefer. I, however, prefer to put a slight smear of silicone on here. And the reason I do that is because if there's any imperfections here, the silicone is a little bit more adaptive than the gasket and can seal. So you are welcome to put it on dry. You are welcome to not use a gasket and put silicone on. Multitude of different ways. My way is to smear a thin layer of silicone onto this, thin layer on that side, apply the gasket, and then put it back on there.
I install all the bolts finger tight and then use a wrench to snug them all up. Once they're snugged, I'll use a torque wrench and torque them all to 17 foot-pounds, which is the torque that my book recommends.
So we have the new water pump in. We've got the bottom hose connected over there. Got the top hose connected here. The bolts are torqued. So the next thing I'm going to do is install the water pump pulley over here. Right, so we've got the water pump pulley installed. Remember that these bolts are only hand tight. We need some tension on the pulley to help us tighten them up. We're going to go ahead and install the thermostat housing with the thermostat inside next.
Once again, I install the bolts finger tight, then snug them up with a wrench. My book gives a torque of 15 foot-pounds for these two bolts.
Well, the first rule of reassembling is make sure you put everything back in its place. See this over here? The thermostat. That should be inside of there. So we need to disassemble all of this and put this back. Right, thermostat and water pump is now installed. Belt has been tensioned. Time to put back the shroud, the fan shroud. One thing to remember is your belt routing. If you can't remember what it is, there's a good picture of what it is. It's supposed to be. Right, so I think everything is done. What remains to do is to fill up with coolant, and we've got to make sure to bleed as much air out of the system as you can. To do that, we're going to use this bleed screw that's easily available. We know it's not quite the highest point, but we'll make sure that we take the air out, and we'll check it again tomorrow.
If you watch the bleed screw in the background, you'll see some of the air escaping as I fill with coolant.
Over there we got a leak.
We got a leak.
So let's take this old clamp off. See, here's my concerns here. They've flattened this peak here and it's flattened on the inside. Right, so we've started her. She's idled over, and we'll check the coolant a few times. If anything is going to happen, it's going to blow the air out into here and suck new coolant back into the cooling system. So there we go, water pump, thermostat, and a new thermostat housing.